Growing up in our modest two-story house, I realized early on that my sister Gina was like a planet from another galaxy in the system of our family world. From the moment she was born, my parents built an invisible dome of care around her, as if afraid that a single wrong move might shatter her delicate microcosm. I was 6 when she arrived, and from the very first days, it was clear Gina was the center of this world, and the rest of us were just satellites orbiting around her. I vividly remember the day I first understood that my role would always be secondary. I was 12, and Gina had just started elementary school. One day, she came home with a slight cold, just a common cold, nothing serious. But my parents' reaction was as if it were something catastrophic. Mom fussed over the medicine cabinet, and Dad panicked, calling our pediatrician to ask if we needed to rush to the hospital. "This is your fault, Miranda," my father suddenly said, his voice cold like an icy rain. "You must have left the door open too long this morning when you went to school." His words hit me like tiny shards of glass. I wanted to argue that Gina could have caught it anywhere. After all, avoiding germs at school was impossible. But I already knew better than to speak up. Instead, I nodded, bending under the weight of the undeserved blame, and silently accepted being grounded for the weekend. That year marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. While my peers played outside and enjoyed carefree afternoons, I was learning household chores under my mom's strict supervision. "You need to learn this, Miranda. It'll come in handy one day," she'd say, handing me a dust cloth or showing me how to load the washing machine properly. Gina, meanwhile, would lounge on the couch, engrossed in yet another cartoon. Once, irritated by the unfairness of it all, I asked Mom why Gina didn't help. "Your sister has a weak immune system," she said curtly, as if ending the conversation. "She can't overexert herself. And you, Miranda, you're doing great. You're so capable." Those words were both praise and dismissal wrapped in one, but I had to learn to accept them as an unchanging part of our lives. Every day reinforced the fact that all my efforts were taken for granted. If Gina brought home a bad grade, I'd be punished for not helping her enough. If she broke Mom's favorite mug, the blame would always land on me. "You should have been watching her, Miranda." Gradually, I began to notice that my existence in this house was enveloped in a constant aura of responsibility for Gina, for order, for peace. This dynamic became especially clear when Gina turned 10, and I was 16. One day, she took my favorite sweater without asking and stained it with juice. My frustration was so overwhelming that I couldn't hold back and went to Mom. But instead of the fairness I hoped for, I got only a weary sigh. "Miranda, you should have put it away. You know how careless she is." That moment was a turning point. I began to understand that I could never change how they treated us. Gina would always come first, and I would remain a shadow. From that point on, I found solace in my studies. I threw myself into books, homework, and anything that could offer me even the slightest glimpse of a better future. Whenever I felt the sting of despair over the injustice, I channeled that energy into my textbooks. My academic success became my quiet rebellion, my escape plan. Teachers noticed my diligence and praised my perseverance, but even those rare moments of joy turned into barbs at home. "Look how easily things come to Miranda," Mom would tell Gina, turning my achievements into yet another criticism of my sister, as if my success were another reason for her failures. Sometimes, it felt like our house was a labyrinth with no way out. But I held on to one thought: college would be my salvation. That was my hope. And even though the road ahead was long, I knew that every paragraph I studied, every assignment I completed, brought me closer to freedom, to a life where I could finally be myself. Mom would tell Gina, "You just need to try harder, sweetheart," but Gina never really had to try. In our family, there was always a ready-made excuse for why she couldn't succeed. And I was always there to pick up the slack and smooth over the rough edges. It felt like an unspoken agreement, written into the fabric of our lives from the moment she was born. But everything changed on the day I graduated high school. I had already resigned myself to the idea that college would remain an unattainable dream. We weren't well off, and I assumed all the family's savings would go toward Gina's education. She was always the priority, and I had no choice but to start looking for work. I imagined myself working at the local diner, attending classes at a community college on the side because it was more affordable. That seemed like the only possible path forward. That evening, after all the graduation ceremonies were over, Mom and Dad called me into the living room. Gina, as usual, was sprawled on the couch, playing on her phone. "Sit down, Miranda," Dad said. His voice was unusually serious. My heart sank. I was already bracing myself for another lecture about family responsibilities. I could almost hear the words, "You need to support the family, set your dreams aside, help Gina." But instead, Mom reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "We've been saving," she said, sliding the envelope across the coffee table. "Ever since you were little." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a bank statement showing an account in my name with enough money to cover 4 years at a state college. But I stammered, unable to believe what I was seeing. I looked at Mom, then at Dad. "We see how well you're doing," Mom explained, casting a quick glance at Gina. "And Gina, college might not be in her future. We decided it would be better to invest this money in you." I was speechless. For the first time in my life, I was receiving something that Gina wasn't. It felt strange, almost wrong after all these years. Sensing my hesitation, Dad leaned forward and added, "But you have to promise us something. When you graduate from college and get a good job, you'll help the family. Don't forget about your sister." I nodded, still stunned by the turn of events. "Of course," I replied quickly, almost automatically. Gina suddenly jumped up and stormed out of the room, slamming her door upstairs. This time, Mom didn't go after her. It was so unusual, seeing my parents allow her to deal with her emotions on her own. This fall, I packed my belongings and left for college, 3 states away from home. The distance felt like freedom. For the first time in my life, I could open windows without worrying that someone might catch a cold. I could study without being interrupted by household chores or constant supervision. I felt like a bird stretching its wings for the first time. College flew by in a whirlwind. 2 months before graduation, I received an offer that completely changed how I envisioned my future. I was invited to work at Anderson & Global, one of the most prestigious firms in the city. The salary was incredible, and the career prospects were dizzying. When I called my parents to share the news, their reaction surprised me. They accepted my choice with understanding. Even my mother, who had always tried to keep everyone under her wing, said, "This is your chance, Miranda." I found a cozy apartment near the office and began building my new life. Each day brought new challenges, but I relished every moment of this freedom. However, I never forgot about my family. Every weekend, I called home. Mom would tell me how Gina was still trying to find herself, and Dad would share updates about the garden. I listened to their stories but knew deep down that my life now belonged to me. For the first time in a long while, I felt like the master of my own destiny. Our conversations always revolved around Gina. Mom would inevitably tell me how she was still finding herself, not working, not going to college, just existing. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel responsible for fixing that situation. It felt strange and liberating at the same time. Gina seemed stuck in the same state she had been in when I left home. 3 years into my job at Anderson Global, my mom called me with the tone of voice I always knew meant a request was coming. I was reviewing quarterly reports when her name lit up on my phone screen. "Miranda, sweetheart," she began in her honeyed voice, the one that instantly made my stomach knot. "You know how hard it's been for Gina to find a job. Your company is so successful, Couldn't you put in a good word for her? Maybe there's something there for her. I closed my eyes, trying to contain a wave of quiet frustration. How could I explain to my mom that Gina, who had never worked and never attended college, wouldn't even make it past the first screening round at Anderson and Global? Our company was known for its rigorous standards and hiring only the best candidates. Well, I began carefully, we do have some openings. Let me send over the application form so Gina can review the requirements. That evening, I forwarded Gina a standard application form. The requirements section read, bachelor's degree, experience with SAP and Oracle systems, fluency in 2 foreign languages, and at least 5 years of professional experience. After that, my mom never mentioned Gina working at my company again. Life went on. I worked hard, earned 2 promotions, and began saving money. The idea of buying my own place became more and more realistic. For the first time, I could envision a space I could truly call my own, where everything would stay exactly where I left it, and I wouldn't have to share my space with other people's problems. 2 years after my last visit, I decided to go home. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The paint on the walls was peeling, and the garden, once meticulously tended by my father, was overgrown with weeds. Gina still lived there. She was sprawled out on the same couch as when we were teenagers, her fingers gliding over her phone screen in the same habitual way. At dinner, I cautiously shared my plans. I've been saving up, I said, pushing peas around on my plate. I'm thinking about buying an apartment. The market's good right now, and with my credit score, I can get a great mortgage rate. A heavy silence fell over the table. Mom and Dad exchanged glances, and Gina suddenly became very interested in her mashed potatoes. I felt like I had disrupted some fragile equilibrium but didn't give it much thought. A week later, Mom called me again. Her voice was different, worried, almost desperate. "Miranda, sweetheart, we need to talk," she began. "Your father, his back is acting up again. He can't take on extra shifts anymore." I listened silently as she listed off problems: a leaking roof, outdated plumbing, peeling walls. Each problem came with a price tag. "We're barely making ends meet," she finished in a strained voice. "And after everything we've done for you. We gave you money for college, gave you a chance at a good life. Now it's your turn to help the family." Her words hit me like an avalanche. It was a reminder of the promise I had made all those years ago. The dream of buying my own apartment seemed more out of reach with every word she spoke. I heard her voice, but all I could think about was how, with each sentence, my plans crumbled like a house of cards. I spent several sleepless nights trying to sort through my feelings. I was racked with guilt. While I was planning to buy an apartment, my parents were living in a house with a leaking roof and peeling walls. In the end, I made the decision that, at the time, felt like the right thing to do. On a Sunday morning, I dialed my mom's number. The phone rang for a long time before she answered, her voice warm yet expectant, as always. "Mom," I began, making an effort to keep my voice steady. "I've been thinking about our last conversation and decided that I want to help. I'll give you access to my account. You'll be able to spend up to $1,500 a month. That should cover repairs and help with the bills." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard her let out a sharp breath, and her voice returned, trembling with emotion. "Miranda, that's so generous. We probably won't even need that much. Just for the essentials, repairs and groceries." I walked her through how to set up the account access, repeating over and over, "Just remember the limit, Mom, $1,500 a month. No more." She assured me that everything would be carefully managed. "We'll be very cautious, sweetheart. You won't even notice." The first few months went smoothly. I was busy with work, barely finding time to check my account statements. When I finally looked, I saw neat, almost modest transactions, $700 here, $800 there, mostly for hardware stores, utilities, and repairs. Everything seemed honest and reasonable. But then the amount started to grow. $900 one month, $1,100 the next. I tried not to worry. After all, repairs could be expensive, and my parents deserved a bit of comfort. Then one day, I received a notification that changed everything. I was in an important meeting when my phone vibrated. A message popped up about large purchases, 2 transactions at Luxe Boutique, one of the most expensive clothing stores in their area. I almost dropped my phone. This had to be a mistake. Could it be an error? As soon as the meeting ended, I rushed to open my account details. There it was, clear as day, a purchase for $2,000. I stared at the screen in disbelief. I had never allowed myself to spend that kind of money on clothes, even while dreaming of my own apartment. My hands trembled as I dialed my mom's number. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the storm of emotions inside me. "I just got a notification about a $2,000 purchase at Luxe Boutique. What's going on?" There was a pause, and then I heard her nervous laugh. "Oh, well, you know. My birthday is next month," she said with a forced lightness, her tone unnaturally cheerful. I saw this gorgeous dress and thought, why not? Lately, I've been so down with everything going on. I sat silently, trying to process her words. A gorgeous dress. $2,000. This money was supposed to go toward fixing the roof, paying bills, making life manageable. Instead, it had gone towards something I couldn't even see. My thoughts ricocheted between outrage and disappointment. "Mom," I finally said, my voice colder than I intended, "this isn't what I had in mind when I gave you access to my account." "Miranda," she interrupted, her voice tinged with offense. "You don't understand how hard it is to feel like everything is falling apart. I just wanted a little bit of joy." But instead of sympathy, all I felt was a surge of anger. "Mom, I gave you this money to help you through tough times, not to buy designer clothes." My words came out sharper than I planned, but I couldn't hold them back. A tense silence fell. I heard her sigh, and her voice turned cold. "Well, if it's such a problem, Miranda, you can just take your account back. We'll manage somehow." Her words made something tighten inside me. But I couldn't ignore the reality of the situation. This was the moment I realized that my gesture of goodwill had become yet another source of disappointment for them, and a new burden for me. "I just wanted to treat myself," Mom said, her voice still carrying notes of resentment. "Fine," I replied, trying not to escalate the argument. "Just please stick to the limit we agreed on." "Of course, sweetheart," she quickly responded, and then, almost casually, added, "By the way, I'm still waiting for my birthday gift. You haven't forgotten, have you?" After hanging up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, where the transaction activity on my account was still displayed. Something felt wrong. It wasn't just about the dress. There was something else, something I couldn't yet see but that loomed on the horizon like a vague, impending threat. I decided to monitor things more closely. I set up notifications on my phone for every transaction, so I'd be aware of every penny spent. The next few days passed quietly, but soon I began noticing that the spending was increasing at an alarming rate. Mom exceeded the $1,500 limit as if it had never existed. One month, she spent $2,000, then $2,500. And before I realized it, my savings account, which I had so carefully nurtured over the years, began to dwindle rapidly. One evening, after receiving another notification about a large purchase, I couldn't take it anymore. Opening my laptop, I created a spreadsheet and began logging every transaction from the past 6 months. The numbers on the screen were shocking. In just a few months, my parents had spent more than I typically did in an entire year. My own expenses were modest: rent, utilities, groceries, and the occasional dinner with colleagues. I drove a used car, bought clothes on sale, and packed lunch for work nearly every day. Meanwhile, my account showed transactions that clearly violated the agreement we had made. I decided it was time to see all the improvements in the house for myself. Picking up the phone, I called my mom. "Mom," I said, trying to sound calm, "I think I'll come visit next weekend. It'd be great to celebrate your birthday together. And I'd love to see the dress you bought and the renovations in the house." There was silence on the other end. I heard her nervous cough before she replied, her tone unexpectedly sharp. "No, sweetheart, there's no need to come. I'm actually not planning to celebrate my birthday this year. I just don't feel up to it." "But, Mom," I began, confused by her refusal, "I haven't been home in months. I'd really like to see you." "Now's not a good time, Miranda," she cut me off, then softened her tone. "You can send a gift in the mail if you want." That conversation triggered alarm bells in my mind. That night, barely sleeping, I went over the account statements from the past 6 months. The more I scrutinized, the more discrepancies I found. Payments to high-end clothing stores, jewelry shops, and electronics boutiques. Someone had purchased a $1,200 smartphone, even though Mom still used her old flip phone, claiming she didn't need anything else. Gradually, a picture began to form before me. It was like a mosaic coming together into a clear image. Bars, nightclubs, designer clothes, beauty salons, and manicures. None of these could possibly belong to my parents. I felt a tightness in my chest as I realized that this spending was nothing like what we had agreed upon. Questions swirled in my mind, but one stood out above all others, terrifying in its implications. Was this all Gina's doing? These weren't the expenses of my aging parents, who claimed they were barely making ends meet. These were the expenses of someone else entirely. Someone young, who loved to party, had expensive tastes, and no job. Gina. The realization hit me like a lightning bolt, piercing to the core. All the talk about the leaking roof and broken plumbing, all the attempts to guilt me into helping that family, had been nothing but a smokescreen. My parents, supposedly living in poverty, hadn't been using my money to fix the house. They had been funding my sister's extravagant lifestyle. My stomach churned as I scrolled through transaction after transaction: a day at the spa for $300, a $500 shopping spree at a designer outlet, $200 bar tabs multiple times a week. It all made sense now, why Mom had been so desperate to keep me from visiting. There were no renovations, no improvements to be proud of. Gina had been living off my money while I'd been saving, sacrificing my own dreams. The next morning, I paced back and forth in my apartment, rehearsing what I would say. My phone sat cold in my hand, like a shard of ice. Around noon, I dialed my mom's number. "Mom," I began, trying to keep my voice steady, "we need to talk about where my money is going." There was a long pause on the other end before Mom spoke, feigning confusion. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I think you know exactly what I mean," I said with a sigh, struggling to remain calm. "Bars. Designer clothes. A new smartphone. Those aren't your expenses, are they? Is this Gina?" Mom inhaled sharply. Then there was a long, heavy exhale, and when she spoke again, her tone was entirely different. The sweetness and pretense were gone. "Well, what did you expect?" she said defensively. "We're family. Gina needs nice things too. It's not her fault she hasn't found her way yet." "Mom, you lied to me," I interrupted, my voice growing firmer. "You told me the money was going toward fixing the house." "We did use some of it for repairs," she retorted. "But, Miranda, you have so much money, and Gina has so little. Besides, you owe us." Or have you forgotten who paid for your college education? I almost laughed. That final guilt trip was predictable, but I was ready for it. Mom, I said calmly, I totaled all the expenses from the past 2 years last night. Do you want to know what I found? She said nothing. I opened the spreadsheet on my laptop and read the numbers aloud, like a verdict. Over the past 24 months, you've spent $72,000. That's more than what you and Dad paid for my college education, including interest. So no, I don't owe you anything anymore. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, without saying a word, my mom hung up. Almost on autopilot, I opened Facebook and typed Gina's name into the search bar. I hadn't looked at her profile in months, too busy with work and my own life. But now, as I scrolled through her photos, my anger only grew with each swipe. She was posing in that $2,000 dress from Luxe Boutique that Mom had justified as a birthday purchase. In one of the recent photos, Gina was lounging by a pool at some resort, a luxurious cocktail in hand. Picture after picture showed parties at clubs, dinners at restaurants I instantly recognized from my bank statements. She was even wearing expensive jewelry that, as it turned out, I had unknowingly financed. She tagged herself in all the upscale places, proudly showcasing a life built on my trust. Each new photo was like another blow. My anger swelled, but so did an odd sense of loss. Gina, my sister, the person for whom I had sacrificed so many of my own dreams, had turned my generosity into her personal bank account. And it seems she didn't care in the slightest. I needed more answers to make everything clear. The only person I could turn to was my Aunt Marie, the one person in our family who had always been a voice of honesty. She never bought into the narrative that Gina could do no wrong and was brave enough to speak the truth. Aunt Marie, I began cautiously, I need to ask you something. Have you been to my parents' house recently? Have they done any work on it? Repairs? Renovations? There was a heavy sigh on the other end of the line, followed by a bitter laugh. Repairs? Miranda, the only thing that's changed in that house is that it's falling further into disrepair. Your dad hasn't even fixed the broken step on the porch. Why are you asking? I took a deep breath and explained how I had been sending money to my parents, thinking it was being used to fix the house. With every word, Aunt Marie's voice grew tenser. Oh, Miranda, she finally said, that money definitely didn't go toward repairs. Gina. She doesn't work, doesn't even try to find a job. All she does is party. Clubs, restaurants, constantly. And she's dragging my Jenny into it, too. Always inviting her to these fun parties, telling her how great it is to live free and easy. I felt my chest tighten, but Aunt Marie's next words made my blood run cold. There's something else you need to know, she continued, lowering her voice. Jenny told me this in confidence, but I think you need to hear it. Gina has been showing everyone a recommendation letter, supposedly written by you. She's telling people she works at your company, under your supervision. Jenny saw the letter. It has your signature on it. The world around me seemed to spin. A recommendation letter with my forged signature. Gina was planning to use it to apply for a position at Carlton Industries, a major company with an impeccable reputation. If she were caught, it wouldn't just destroy her reputation, it could damage mine as well. I worked for one of the most prestigious firms in the city, and any stain on my name could undo everything I had worked so hard to achieve. I hung up the phone and immediately called the HR department at Carlton Industries. My hands trembled as I explained the situation. It's a forged recommendation letter, I said. My sister is trying to apply for a job with you using a letter in my name. I didn't write it, never signed it, and she has never worked at my company. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. 2 days later, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. When I finally answered, my mom was screaming so loudly that my eardrum almost burst. How dare you sabotage your sister's career, she shrieked. She was about to get that job at Carlton Industries. Mom, I said, barely holding back my anger, she forged my signature. That's fraud. She's finally trying to do something with her life. Mom cut me off, ignoring my words. And you ruined it. You've always been jealous of her. I heard shuffling, and then my dad's voice came on the line, cold and filled with fury. Gina has been crying for 2 days because of you, he growled. Is that what you wanted? To hurt your sister? Congratulations, you're no longer my daughter. Consider yourself disowned. I didn't even get a chance to respond before he continued in the same cold, calculated tone. If you ever want us to forgive you, you'll have to start sending us more money. A lot more. Maybe then we'll think about forgiving you for what you've done to Gina. Those words were the breaking point. Years of manipulation, guilt, and unfairness came crashing down on me with unbearable weight. But in that moment, everything suddenly became crystal clear. No, I said firmly. I don't owe you anything anymore. I helped you out of the kindness of my heart, and you lied to me. If you need money so badly, why don't you ask Gina to help? She's the one you've been spending it on anyway. Before they could respond, I hung up the phone. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like I could hear the dull thuds echoing in my ears. I opened my banking app and started acting without hesitation. One tap, then another, confirmation, and my mother's access to my account was permanently revoked. When I saw the notification confirming the operation, I felt a weight that I'd carried for years lift from my shoulders. But at the same time, a new, heavier weight settled in the pit of my stomach. I knew what was about to happen. The next morning, my phone started ringing. My voicemail filled up faster than I could delete the messages. How could you do this to us? Mom's voice screeched. After everything we've done for you. You're selfish. Her words echoed in my mind, leaving a dull ache. Then came a message from Gina. You think you're better than everyone with your fancy job and perfect life, huh? Just wait, watch how quickly it all falls apart. I didn't listen to the messages to the end. Each time, my fingers mechanically pressed delete. But the calls didn't stop. Text messages, voicemails, emails, they came day after day, growing nastier and more desperate. I started blocking numbers, but soon my parents began calling from other phones. I had to block those too. After a week of relentless bombardment, Aunt Marie called me. Her voice was soft but cautious. Miranda, sweetheart, she said. I just wanted to warn you. Your parents are calling everyone in the family. They're telling them what a terrible daughter you are, how you abandoned them in their time of need. I stayed silent, feeling those words burn through me from the inside out. Jenny and I know the truth, she added. We're trying to explain to everyone that they're wrong, but no one wants to listen. I just thought you should know what's going on. After that call, I felt a strange sense of relief. Yes, my parents were trying to destroy my reputation even among our relatives, but I had people who stood by me. That was 3 months ago. Since then, my life has changed. My savings account started growing. It's amazing how quickly money adds up when you're not spending it on other people. I began seriously looking at apartments. On weekends, I toured properties, spoke with agents, and researched mortgage options. Last week, I even met with an expert who helped me calculate the perfect budget for my future purchase. The calls and messages have nearly stopped. Occasionally, I'll get a stray message from an unknown number. I delete them without reading. I don't need to know what they think or want anymore. It doesn't matter. Sometimes I think about them. Is Dad's back really as bad as they claimed? Is Mom still covering for Gina's excesses? And Gina, she's probably still living her lavish lifestyle, though likely at someone else's expense now. Has she tried forging someone else's signature? These thoughts come and go, but they no longer take up space in my mind the way they used to. My life is focused on other things now. I work. I save. I spend time with friends who value me for who I am, not for what I can give them. I'm learning to be myself, without guilt for finally putting myself first. Will I ever reconnect with my family? Honestly, I don't know. Maybe someday, if they change. Or maybe if I find it within myself to forgive them, even if they never ask for it. But for now, I'm focused on my life, a life I'm building on my own terms, free from their expectations and the heavy weight of guilt. And in that, I've found freedom.